He promised to change. I gave him every chance. But now I've changed my mind about everything. I was only 18 when my life changed forever. At the time, I was still a teenager, full of mistakes, insecurities, and half-grown dreams. That was when I met him, the boy who would later become the father of my child. He was 17, a little rough around the edges, but charming in a way that pulled me in. Before I even realized it, I was pregnant. I was scared, overwhelmed, and far too young to understand what building a family really meant. Those first years were nothing but chaos. Sleepless nights, arguments over money, immature fights where we both said things we couldn't take back. I was barely figuring out who I was as a person, let alone who I was as a mother. He, on the other hand, seemed even less prepared. He loved the baby, yes, but he didn't know how to be a partner, and he didn't know how to be consistent. The relationship was rocky from the start. There were moments of tenderness, where he would hold me after a long day and whisper that we would figure it out together. But there were also weeks of coldness, silence, or anger that left me feeling alone, even though he was right there beside me. By the time we had been together for a few years, I had already started to question if this was the life I wanted. But leaving felt impossible. I had a child with him. My world was tied to his in ways I couldn't untangle. And then, one day, he left. When he left me for another woman, I thought my world had collapsed. We had already been together for nearly 3 years, and although it was rocky, I believed deep down that we would figure it out eventually. But the day he packed his bag and walked out, leaving me alone with our child, I realized just how fragile everything really was. First, I hated myself more than I hated him. I replayed every argument, every careless word, every moment I let my temper or immaturity get the better of me. I told myself I had driven him away. And maybe I had, at least partly. The guilt was heavy, unbearable at times. But here's the thing. Pain can either destroy you or push you to rebuild. And slowly, piece by piece, I chose the latter. I threw myself into therapy. At first, I was terrified of sitting across from a stranger and unpacking years of mistakes. But those sessions became my lifeline. I learned to understand my anger, my insecurity, my toxic patterns. I learned to forgive myself. Even as I carried the weight of raising a child alone, I got on medication for my mental health. It wasn't magic, but it gave me the stability I desperately needed. The fog started to lift. The constant spiral of overthinking slowed down. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I also got a job. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me independence, my own money, my own routine, my own sense of self outside of being someone's girlfriend or someone's mom. Day by day, I started to feel stronger. I began to recognize the woman in the mirror again, not just the exhausted shell I had been for so long. And then, almost a year later, he came back. It had been nearly a year since he walked out. By then, I had built a fragile kind of stability. My life wasn't perfect, far from it, but I had routines that kept me grounded. Mornings started with getting my child ready, afternoons at work, evenings filled with therapy, homework, cooking, and endless laundry. It was exhausting, but it was mine. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel like my survival depended on someone else. And then, he came back. I remember that day vividly. He knocked on my door like a stranger, shoulders slouched, eyes downcast. He looked thinner, older somehow, though only a year had passed. In his hands, he carried nothing but a backpack, as if the weight of his choices had finally stripped him bare. When I opened the door, my heart slammed against my ribs. 1,000 emotions collided: anger, longing, fear, hope. I wanted to slam the door in his face. I wanted to pull him inside and make him explain everything at once. Instead, I just stood there frozen, waiting for him to speak. "I messed up," he said finally, his voice raw. I thought leaving would fix something, but it didn't. "I miss you. I miss our kid. I want to come home." Those words were daggers and balm at the same time. Part of me wanted to believe him, to believe that all the pain had been worth it, that he had finally realized what we meant to him. Another part of me screamed that this was a trap, that I had clawed my way out of the darkness once and might not survive falling back in. Still, I let him inside. Over the next few days, we talked more than we had in years. He told me that being with the other woman hadn't given him the peace he was looking for, that no matter where he went, he couldn't escape his own demons, his anger, his depression, his habit of shutting down instead of facing problems. He swore he was ready to change, and for a while, I let myself believe him. I told him about therapy, about the medication, about how hard I'd worked to rebuild myself. He listened, nodding, promising that he wanted the same for himself. He promised he'd get help, that he'd step up as a father, that he'd finally carry the weight with me instead of letting me drown alone, that I wanted so badly to believe that this was our second chance, that we could rewrite our story, that love could still be enough. So I took him back, and for a while, it almost felt like the right decision. The first few weeks after I let him come back felt almost surreal. It was as if we had pressed some imaginary reset button, erasing years of mistakes and pain. For the first time in a long time, our house felt warm again. My child was overjoyed to have both parents under one roof, and I let myself get lost in that happiness. He was different, or at least that's what I wanted to believe. He would come home with small surprises, my favorite snacks, flowers from the corner store, little toys for our kid. He started helping around the house, folding laundry, cooking dinner once in a while. It wasn't perfect, but compared to the emptiness I'd felt before, it was enough to make my heart swell with hope. We even laughed together again. Silly, genuine laughter over movies, inside jokes, or just the mess of everyday life. Those moments felt like oxygen. I told myself, this is what love is supposed to feel like. And maybe, just maybe, all the hardship we had endured was finally paying off. But looking back, I realize how fragile that happiness really was. It wasn't built on true change. It was built on my hope, my willingness to ignore the cracks, because I wanted so badly to believe in us. The cracks began to show sooner than I expected. He promised me he would go to therapy. He even let me make the appointments for him, writing the dates on the calendar, setting reminders in his phone. But when the days came, there was always an excuse. Work was too busy. He forgot. He wasn't feeling well. Or worse, he'd insist the appointment was scheduled for a different day, gaslighting me into questioning my own memory that I'd sit in the car outside the clinic, waiting, while he assured me he would just run inside and check the time. Minutes would turn into hours, and eventually, we'd drive home with nothing accomplished. It became a pattern, one I recognized but kept brushing aside, telling myself at least he's trying. Meanwhile, the little gestures, the flowers, the laughter, the cooking started to fade. Slowly, almost invisibly, he slipped back into old habits. The anger, the depression, the apathy. I would beg him to see how much I was doing, how much I was carrying, but his response was always the same. I'll do better. Just give me time. And I gave him time. Again and again. I was so desperate to hold on to that illusion of a fresh start that I ignored the sinking feeling in my chest. The feeling that maybe he hadn't changed at all, because love makes you blind. And I was already walking with my eyes closed, hoping the ground beneath me wouldn't give way. As weeks turned into months, the glow of that so-called fresh start dimmed until it was barely a flicker. I kept telling myself that real change takes time, that maybe I was being impatient. But deep down I could feel the truth gnawing at me. Nothing had really changed. The little things told the story better than any big blow-up ever could. I'd come home after a long day at work, balancing grocery bags on one arm and our child on the other, only to find him still in bed, scrolling through his phone. Dishes piled up in the sink. The laundry basket overflowed. The trash hadn't been taken out in days. It was as if my effort to keep our lives together was invisible to him. And when I tried to bring it up, when I asked him to help, he'd sigh and promise to do better. Sometimes he'd wash a few dishes or take out the trash, but only after I'd already broken down in frustration. It felt less like partnership and more like I was managing a teenager who needed constant reminders. Therapy was another endless cycle of disappointment. I'd sit with him, walk him through why it mattered, even drive him to appointments. But there was always an excuse. He'd forget. He'd reschedule. He'd insist he didn't need it, that he could handle things on his own. But nothing was being handled. The anger still surfaced in quiet bursts. The depression hung heavy in the air, and his lack of motivation became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, I was growing stronger. Therapy had given me tools to cope, medication had stabilized me, and my job gave me purpose outside of being his caretaker. The contrast between us was stark. I was climbing out of the pit, while he seemed content to stay at the bottom, waiting for me to pull him up. And somewhere along the way, I realized that the love I once felt was slipping away. It wasn't a sudden break, like a glass shattering. It was slow erosion, like waves pulling at a shoreline until one day you look down and realize the sand is gone. I'd look at him, at the man who was supposed to be my partner, and instead of warmth, I felt exhaustion. Instead of attraction, I felt pity. Instead of hope, I felt resentment that I wanted him to rise with me. I wanted us to rebuild together. But the more I carried alone, the more I understood that maybe I wasn't in love anymore. Maybe I was just clinging to the memory of what I wished we could have been. And that realization terrified me more than anything else. The realization that my feelings were fading didn't hit me like lightning. It was quieter than that, almost like background noise I had been ignoring for too long. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just stress, exhaustion from juggling work, motherhood, and the weight of keeping our lives together. I told myself that if I could just rest, or if we could just take a trip together, things would feel better. But no matter how many times I tried to rekindle what we once had, the truth was unavoidable. I didn't feel the same anymore. That I remember one evening in particular. I had cooked dinner, cleaned the kitchen, and finally collapsed on the couch, aching for just a moment of peace. He walked in, barely glanced at me, and asked why I always seemed tired and moody. There was no offer to help, no recognition of the countless things I had done that day to keep us afloat. Just criticism wrapped in indifference that I sat there staring at him. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt by his words. I felt nothing, and that nothing scared me more than anger ever could. That night, after putting our child to bed, I decided I had to confront the reality of our situation. I asked him to sit down, and I told him, as calmly and clearly as I could, that I couldn't keep living this way, that I needed him to step up, to take therapy seriously, to contribute not just financially, but emotionally. Or else I didn't see a future for us. He looked at me with wide eyes, like I had just threatened to take his whole world away. He promised, again, that he would do better, that he would prove to me he could change. He said all the right words, words I had heard too many times before, but this time was different. This time, I wasn't clinging to his promises. I was evaluating them, testing them, watching his actions like a scientist observing an experiment, waiting for proof that things would be different. And the more I watched, the more disappointed I became. He might take out the trash once, but the next day it was back to me. He might make an effort to be affectionate for a night, but within days he was cold and distant again. Therapy remained a broken record of excuses. It became clear that his promises were nothing more than band-aids, temporary fixes designed to keep me from walking away. Meanwhile, the emptiness inside me grew. I realized I was no longer trying to save our relationship out of love. I was doing it out of obligation, to our child, to the years we had spent together, to the hope that maybe someday he would become the man I needed. But hope alone can't sustain a relationship. And the truth was, I was slowly drowning in resentment that I wasn't just losing my love for him. I was losing myself. The breaking point didn't arrive with a dramatic fight or some earth-shattering betrayal. It crept in quietly, the way rust eats through metal, slow, steady, but devastating. Once you finally noticed that it was a Sunday afternoon, one of his rare days off. I had planned the whole weekend around the idea of us spending time together as a family. I imagined us cooking breakfast, maybe taking our child to the park, coming home to watch a movie. Simple things, normal things, the kind of moments I thought could remind us why we ever tried in the first place. But instead, he slept in until nearly noon, rolling out of bed with barely a grunt of acknowledgement. He spent most of the afternoon glued to his phone, scrolling aimlessly while I juggled cooking, cleaning, and entertaining our child. By evening, I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally drained. And I remember standing in the kitchen, hands deep in soapy water, scrubbing dishes from dinner. He walked in, opened the fridge, and complained that there wasn't enough food. I froze, staring down at the suds. My hands trembled, not from anger this time, but from the crushing weight of realization. I was living the same cycle all over again. This was supposed to be our fresh start, our redemption arc. Instead, I had become the caretaker, the provider, the emotional backbone, while he sat back, untouched by the effort it took to keep us afloat. That I wiped my hands, turned to him, and asked, maybe begged, for him to just see me, to understand that I was burning out, that I couldn't keep carrying everything while he drifted through life. His response? A shrug. And then, "You're overreacting again. I told you I'll change. Why can't you just trust me?" That was it. The moment everything inside me went silent. The anger, the hope, the longing, all of it vanished. What was left wasn't fiery passion or righteous fury. It was emptiness, a void that told me he'll never change. And if I stay, I'll disappear too. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about the promises he had made, about the countless times I had given him another chance, another extension of my faith. I thought about the woman I had become, stronger, more independent, more aware of what I deserved. And I realized that the person lying next to me wasn't my partner. He was an anchor, and I was tired of drowning. That was the night I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, and this time, it wouldn't be me bending to keep him comfortable. Once the realization hit me that night, it didn't leave. It sat heavy on my chest the next morning when I got up to make breakfast. It followed me as I packed our child's bag for daycare. It echoed in my head every time I looked at him, half asleep on the couch with his phone in his hand, oblivious to how close I was to giving up. For days, I carried that weight in silence. I replayed the words I wanted to say, over and over. How do you tell someone you once thought you'd spend forever with that you're done? How do you tell the father of your child that you don't love him anymore? Every version I rehearsed sounded either too cruel or too soft, too final or not final enough. Finally, one evening, I couldn't keep it inside any longer. He came home late, muttering about how tired he was. I had spent the entire day managing everything: work, errands, cooking, cleaning, and by the time he walked through the door, I was beyond exhaustion. Our child was already asleep. The apartment was quiet, and I knew this was the moment that I asked him to sit down. He gave me a puzzled look, but did as I asked. Sinking into the couch like this was just another conversation he could brush off. But my voice was steady this time. Different. I can't do this anymore, I said at first. He blinked at me like he didn't understand. He asked what I meant, and I explained, slowly, carefully, but firmly. I told him that I had given him every chance, that I had waited for him to change, that I had carried this relationship on my back until there was nothing left of me to give. I told him that love had turned into obligation, and I couldn't survive living like this any longer. He tried to argue. He said I was being unfair, that change takes time, that I hadn't trusted him enough. He promised, yet again, that he could do better. But for the first time, I wasn't swayed. The words fell flat because I had heard them all before. When he realized I wasn't budging, his tone shifted. He accused me of giving up too soon, of being cold, of not appreciating everything he had tried to do. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just repeated, calmly and firmly, that I was done, that I couldn't sacrifice my own happiness and our child's future for the sake of clinging to a relationship that had been broken for years. The silence that followed was deafening. He sat there, staring at me, as if waiting for me to take it all back. But I didn't. For the first time in a very long time, I meant every word. That night, we slept in separate rooms. And even though the air was heavy with tension, I felt a strange sense of peace. Because I had finally spoken the truth out loud. And once spoken, there was no going back. The next morning felt like the calm before a storm. He moved around the apartment quieter than usual, watching me with a mix of suspicion and desperation. I could feel the weight of his gaze as I packed my child's lunch, straightened the living room, and went about the motions of my routine. Finally, he broke the silence. "Look," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard in months. "I know I've messed up, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family." He launched into what I had come to recognize as his cycle of last-minute promises. He said he'd get serious about therapy. He swore he'd take on more responsibility with the house, with our child, with everything. He even reached for my hands, looking me dead in the eyes, pleading for me to give him just one more chance. And for a moment, I almost felt that familiar tug, the urge to believe him, to let myself be pulled back into hope. But something had shifted inside me. His words didn't sound like love anymore. They sounded like fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of having to face himself without me to carry the weight. That I listened to him, nodding, but inside I was detached. I was watching the scene as if from the outside, realizing I was no longer emotionally tethered to his promises. When he finished, I spoke carefully, not unkindly, but with a clarity I had never managed before. "I've heard all of this before. Every word. And every time, nothing changes. I don't doubt that you're scared. I don't doubt that you don't want to lose what we have. But you've already lost me. I've been gone for a while now. I just didn't admit it until last night." He flinched as if I'd struck him. For the first time, he looked genuinely shaken, as though he was finally realizing that my resolve wasn't something he could charm or guilt his way through. He tried again, softer this time, reminding me of our history, of the good moments, of our child who loved us both. He said we owed it to our family to fight harder, to stay together no matter what. But I knew the truth. Staying together at all costs wasn't noble. It was destructive. Our child deserved to grow up in a home filled with love and respect, not resentment and broken promises that I told him as much. And though he didn't like my answer, he didn't argue further. He just sat there, quiet, as if trying to process the reality he had worked so hard to avoid. That silence between us was the loudest confirmation I'd ever heard. This was the end in the days that followed. The apartment felt heavier than ever, like every wall had absorbed our arguments and every corner carried echoes of broken promises. He walked around subdued, quieter, careful, as though any wrong move might push me further away. But the truth he didn't want to face was that I was already gone, that I caught myself watching him sometimes, almost like he was a stranger I had once known. The man sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone wasn't the boy I had fallen in love with years ago, full of energy and dreams. This was someone hardened by his own refusal to change, someone who mistook bare minimum gestures for effort, someone who thought my love could compensate for everything he refused to face in himself and me. I was tired of being the savior. I was tired of waiting for him to catch up while I dragged both of us forward. Love, I realized, isn't supposed to feel like drowning while the other person clings to your shoulders. The final conversation wasn't a fight. It wasn't even dramatic. It was calm, almost heartbreakingly so. I told him I had decided to move on, that I needed peace, stability, and respect, things he couldn't or wouldn't give me, that our child deserved to see what a healthy relationship looked like, even if it meant growing up in two separate homes. That he cried, for the first time in years. Real tears, not anger masked as frustration, but grief. And for a moment, I felt the tug of old emotions, the urge to console him, to take it all back. But I stayed firm, because pity is not love, and promises without action are just empty words. When he left that night with a bag of clothes slung over his shoulder, the apartment felt strangely light, quiet, yes, but not suffocating. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I tucked our child into bed, sat on the couch alone, and let the silence wash over me. It wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. Looking back, I realized something vital. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. And as much as it hurt to admit it, I knew this was the right ending. For me, for our child, even for him, though he might not see it yet. Because you can't build a future on the ruins of broken promises. You can only start over, stronger, wiser, and finally free. Thank you for watching this story on True Tales Hub. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. That we post new tales twice a day, and each one comes with unexpected twists you won't see coming.